a casual hoodie, a luxury showroom, and one jaw-dropping reveal. Sometimes the way a story begins is the very reason people lean closer instead of turning away. And this one starts with a man who walked into his own dealership dressed like someone no one thought twice about, only to leave every person in the room speechless when the truth came out. Darrell Carter pulled into the sun-baked parking lot of Prestige Motors, the crown jewel dealership he had recently acquired in Scottsdale, Arizona, where the desert heat shimmered above the asphalt and the gleaming cars outside looked like jewels, waiting to be chosen, their glassy surfaces reflecting the sunlight so fiercely it almost hurt to stare too long. He parked his modest, slightly dusty SUV in a back corner, away from the neat row of Range Rovers, Porsches, and Bentleys that lined the prime spaces right by the entrance. Because Darrell didn't come here today to be recognized or to draw attention. He came in a gray hoodie, faded jeans, and scuffed sneakers. The kind of outfit that would make him look like just another walk-in customer with maybe a dream in his eyes but not much in his wallet. His decision was deliberate, because while he was the new owner of Prestige Motors, he wanted to see what kind of culture was brewing inside when people didn't know the boss was watching, and the only way to see the truth was to blend in, like a shadow. Stepping out of his car, he adjusted his hoodie, scanned the sleek facade of the dealership, and breathed deeply, reminding himself why he had bought this place in the first place, not just for profit, but because he believed culture mattered as much as sales numbers, and a dealership that mistreated customers would eventually collapse under the weight of its arrogance. He pushed open the glass door, and the sudden whoosh of air conditioning hit him like a wave, carrying with it the scent of polished leather, waxed paint, and faint traces of coffee brewed too long. Rows of cars gleamed under the fluorescent lights, each one staged like art, their tires shining with perfect blackness, their hoods gleaming under precise beams. A silver coupe sat in the spotlight, its design aggressive, its allure undeniable. Darrell's eyes scanned the floor, but what really caught his attention wasn't the cars, it was the subtle pause in conversation as he entered. The way three employees near the front desk, 2 men and a woman, exchanged glances, their eyes moving from his sneakers to his hoodie before darting back to each other. He felt the shift in the air instantly, that faint, silent judgment he had known his whole life, the kind that wasn't spoken aloud but lived in the narrowing of eyes and the polite tightening of smiles. He kept walking, calm, casual, pretending to admire a black SUV with chrome accents, but in truth he was observing them as much as they were observing him. And then she appeared, Susan, the dealership manager, a middle-aged woman in her 40s, sharp-jawed, confident, wearing a crisp blazer that looked freshly pressed, and heels that clicked like authority against the floor. Her clipboard tucked under her arm like a sword she wielded daily. Her smile, at first, was polite, rehearsed, the kind you gave anyone who walked in, but Darrell didn't miss the way her eyes narrowed slightly, scanning him from head to toe, as though she was quickly calculating whether he was worth her time. "Excuse me," she said, her voice even, but carrying a faint note of superiority. "Can I help you with something today?" Darrell smiled politely, keeping his tone light and calm. "Just here to look around," he said, gesturing vaguely toward the cars. Susan's polite mask slipped for half a second, her smile tightening as her voice carried a new edge. "Are you shopping for a car?" she asked. Her words clipped, and Darrell gave a little nod. "Something like that," he said, still keeping his calm demeanor, but Susan's lips pressed together as though she already had her answer. "Well," she said, shifting her clipboard, "we cater to a very specific clientele here, and most of our inventory requires Maybe I could recommend." Before she could finish, someone from across the room called, "Hey Susan, delivery guy's here," and she broke eye contact for just a second, but when she looked back at Darrell, her gaze was even sharper, like she wanted to make sure he didn't touch anything he couldn't afford. Darrell raised an eyebrow slightly, still calm, and said, "You're assuming I'm not qualified." The words were soft but carried weight, and Susan blinked, momentarily caught off guard, but recovered quickly with a brittle smile. "I'm just trying to save you some time," she said smoothly. "These vehicles start at 6 figures. Maybe I can direct you to." Darrell let her words hang, then turned his head to look at a gleaming silver coupe nearby, his fingers brushing its door handle gently. "Nice car," he said casually. Susan's brows twitched, but she forced a smile. "It is. But perhaps when you're ready to make a serious inquiry, we can set up an appointment. For now, I'll have to ask you not to touch the vehicles," she said with forced politeness that dripped condescension, and Darrell stepped back, nodding slightly, his hands sliding into his pockets, his voice calm but direct. "All right then, let's hear it. What would you recommend for someone like me?" Susan blinked, not expecting him to challenge her, but before she could think too long, Darrell added, "If you think you know what I need, I'm all ears." And Susan's mask cracked further, her voice dropping slightly as she said, "Maybe something a little more budget-friendly. I can give you directions to a dealership that specializes in pre-owned vehicles." And Darrell's faint smile flickered, but his eyes stayed sharp. "That's quite the assumption," he said softly, and though his tone was gentle, the words sliced through the air like glass. Susan faltered but turned briskly, saying she'd be back with a list, and as she walked away, Darrell could see the stiffness in her posture, the way she was clinging to her authority like armor. Around him, the employees had resumed their murmured conversations, but he could feel their eyes flicking toward him, watching, waiting, whispering. Susan returned with a sheet of paper, a list of pre-owned vehicles: an old sedan, an older SUV, a compact hybrid, each one priced well below the dealership's usual inventory. "These might be more suitable for your situation," she said, forcing cheer into her tone, and Darrell took the sheet, glanced at it, and folded it into his pocket, his lips twitching faintly. "Appreciate the effort," he said simply, and Susan's composure faltered just slightly at his unshaken calm. She leaned closer, lowering her voice. "Listen, I'm just being realistic with you. Prestige Motors isn't for everyone, and I don't want to waste your time." And Darrell tilted his head. "And what exactly makes you think I'm not your target customer?" he asked, his voice low but steady. And Susan, with the confidence of someone who had been in the business too long to second-guess herself, said, "I've been doing this a long time. I can tell when someone's out of their depth." And Darrell repeated her words softly, almost amused. "Out of their depth. Interesting." His tone was neutral, but his eyes carried something deeper. And Susan pressed on. "It's better to be upfront than to have someone leave disappointed." But Darrell chuckled softly, shaking his head. "Honest, huh? I like honesty. How about this? You let me speak to the owner. Think we can make that happen?" Susan froze, her eyebrows lifting, then she gave a stiff smile. "The owner? Well, that's not possible today. The owner doesn't just drop by, they're very busy." And Darrell nodded slowly. "I'm sure they are. But maybe you could give them a call. Let them know I'm here. I think they'd want to meet me." And Susan's smile grew tighter, her voice thinning. "Look, sir, I'm trying to be polite, but this is getting ridiculous. If you're serious, we can schedule you with one of our consultants. Otherwise, what?" Darrell asked, his tone still calm but edged with steel. And Susan finally dropped the pretense. "Otherwise, I'll have to ask you to leave," she said, her words echoing slightly in the quiet showroom. And Darrell stood still, his gaze locked with hers, before slowly pulling out his phone. He scrolled casually, held it to his ear, and said, "Yeah, it's me. I'm at the dealership. Everything's fine, just a little misunderstanding. Could you let them know I'm here? Thanks." Then slipped the phone back into his pocket and looked at Susan calmly. "They'll be here shortly," he said. Susan's face paled slightly, her clipboard trembling in her hands, and the other employees stopped pretending to work, their eyes wide, whispers hissing quietly across the room. Minutes ticked by, and then the glass doors opened with a soft chime, and Alex Carter, the sharply dressed regional director in a navy suit, strode in with polished shoes and authority radiating off him. "Mr. Carter," he said warmly, shaking Darrell's hand, "so good to see you." And the room froze as every employee realized what Susan had missed. This casually dressed man in a hoodie was Darrell Carter, the new owner of Prestige Motors. Susan's clipboard nearly fell from her hands, her face flushing white. "Mr. Carter," she stammered, but Alex turned sharply. "Susan, you've already met the new owner." "I see." And Darrell raised a hand. "Calm. It's all right, Alex. We just got off on the wrong foot." But his words carried the weight of a lesson, not forgiveness. Susan whispered apologies, stammering, but Darrell's eyes didn't waver. "Tell me, Susan, if I wasn't the owner, would you have treated me any differently today? Would I have deserved the same respect as someone in a suit?" And the silence that followed was answer enough. Darrell turned to Alex and said, "Let's gather everyone in the conference room. We need to talk about culture." And soon, the staff sat nervously at the long glass table, while Darrell stood at the head, his voice calm but commanding, introducing himself as the new owner and laying out a vision of respect, inclusivity, and accountability. He told them plainly that a dealership that judged customers by appearance was doomed to fail, and he promised to implement new training, new expectations, and a new culture where every person, regardless of dress, background, or assumptions, would be treated with dignity. Susan admitted her mistake, trembling, her cheeks flushed. But Darrell gave her a second chance, reminding her and everyone else that accountability comes first, but growth is possible if people are willing. By the end of the meeting, the nervous energy shifted into something new, renewed purpose. The realization that the dealership's future wasn't just about cars, but about the way people were treated. And as Darrell walked back onto the showroom floor, the afternoon sun streaming in through the glass, he smiled faintly, thinking about how much work lay ahead, but also how necessary it was, because respect, after all, isn't the foundation of everything, whether in business, in life, or in the simple act of looking a man in a hoodie in the eye and seeing him for who he truly is.